Welcome to AFT's virtual roundtable discussion with AFT President Randi Weingarten, Dr. Jill Biden, and Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Hi, everyone. My name is Randi Weingarten, and I am delighted that on this day in July, in a week that's been very up and down with the presidential announcements of school opening and taking money away and things like that, we actually have a panel today on school reopening, and with people who really know what they're talking about and care about this so much, Senator Elizabeth Warren and Dr. Jill Biden, who happens to be married to the vice president, who happens to be the Democratic nominee for the presidency of the United States of America. I guess that's not fully formed until, a few weeks from now, but I think that we can bet that he's going to be the Democratic nominee. With Senator Warren and with Dr. Biden, we have several other educators because, as you know, Senator Warren and Dr. Biden are both educators. And those are AFT leaders from across the country: Philippe Abraham from New York, Fed Ingram from Florida, Melissa Cropper from Ohio, and Jerry Jordan from Philadelphia, from Pennsylvania. So ultimately, we are talking about reopening schools, which is on the top of the mind of virtually everyone in the country. We at the AFT really want to reopen schools safely for our kids and for the staff that works with our kids every single day. And we didn't hear anything from the president about this for weeks and weeks and weeks until after Joe Biden spoke at the NEA convention earlier last week, lifting up educators, pledging support for public education. And now suddenly, President Trump and Betsy DeVos have woken up about schools and about reopening after being completely silent for months. But instead of doing what we can usually count on a president to do in terms of leading with a plan that keeps teachers, kids, families safe, Trump is demanding schools and campuses reopen without funding any of the necessary measures to do so safely, rejecting the CDC guidance, and he and Betsy DeVos are, of course, it's unlawful, threatening to withhold funds if schools don't reopen. That's not presidential. That's not nice. That's reckless and dangerous. And it's purely political on his part. It abandons children, it abandons educators in the midst of this pandemic with stakes across the country having spiking cases. The truth is that America's teachers don't want to wait for a vaccine to reopen schools. We know public schooling and in-school attendance is vitally important for our kids. But teachers and our students need a real plan to reopen our schools and resources to do it safely. And our members know that 76% of them support going back to school buildings if we have the proper safeguards, such as physical distancing of 6 feet, masks and other PPE, proper cleaning and ventilation, and reasonable accommodations for those at risk. We know our kids need to go back to school. In the same poll, we know what you all know. Remote learning is a supplement. It doesn't substitute for in-school learning. And 86% of our educators found that it didn't really meet the needs, even though they were Herculean in trying to help turn on a dime to do remote education. It's not just the loss of learning that worries educators. Teachers are concerned about, paras are concerned about kids, how they're doing, feeling isolated. So many kids have told us that. The experiencing of trauma from losing a loved one, the food insecurity at home. And we know that our kids need the personal engagement and the socialization with peers. So ultimately, you know everything I pretty much have said, but teachers and parents want to make sure that this year is a good year for kids. Next year, or this year, the next few weeks, will likely be a hybrid of remote, mixed, and in-person instruction. There's nothing normal about that, but there's nothing normal about the time that we're in. We're facing these three crises: the racial justice crisis, the pandemic, economic crisis. And there needs to be people who help us meet that moment. And frankly, what you have today is you have not only our leaders here who are helping to meet that moment, but you have two amazing leaders in Senator Elizabeth Warren and in Dr. Jill Biden, who really are listening and who understand kids and communities and schools and educators. And so I want to start with Senator Warren. I teased before when I pulled up our plan and I said, see, Senator, we even had a plan for reopening schools, because Senator Warren has thought about more things around education than I think any other human being I've ever met in my life. Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Oh, thank you. And hello, AFT. I am so happy to have this chance to be on a call with some of the strongest, hardest working, and most dedicated people in the country. America's public school teachers and counselors and cafeteria workers and bus drivers, the people who devote their lives to educating our children. I'm so grateful to all of you. You know, I never thought I would end up in politics, not in a million years. But when I ran for office, I quickly discovered nobody does this on their own. I learned that to be effective, it is critical to have allies who know how to get the job done. Allies like my dear friend, Randi Weingarten. Randi, you know how to get out there every day and make it happen. And I want to give a shout out to someone who has been a longtime advocate for students and for hardworking families. The next First Lady of the United States, Dr. Jill Biden. Educators deserve a partner in the White House, and with President Joe Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, they won't just get one advocate, they will get two, and that's what we need. This is a time of crisis for our nation, and across the country, the fight for social, racial, and economic justice has reached a new threshold. As we fight for justice, we are also fighting to stem the tide of the coronavirus outbreak. This pandemic has already killed more than 130,000 Americans, and the Trump administration's response to this public health crisis has been cruel, heartless, and incompetent. So today, as families are suffering and they're sick and they're scared, Donald Trump's administration has basically just given up the fight to try to stem the tide of this crisis. Teachers and families have worked hard to try to keep kids learning during this crisis, but the federal government has failed our students and failed our schools. And Betsy DeVos has spent the entire pandemic finding new ways to shovel millions of taxpayer dollars into private schools. In Congress, Republicans have failed to provide schools with the resources they need to be able to weather this storm. And we know distance learning just isn't the same as being in school. We know that distance learning has been devastating for some of our kids, and particularly for kids of color. And that's why we all want the schools to be able to open, but only when they can open safely. I've got news for President Trump and the Republicans who are trying to politicize the safety and well-being of our students. You can't just snap your fingers and reopen the schools. Forcing schools to reopen without providing them with the resources they need to do so safely, or the flexibility to be able to respond to outbreaks in their community is both dangerous and reckless. Reopening schools is going to require careful planning that puts the safety of students, teachers, staff, all first, and provides the methodology and the attention needed to prevent the spread of COVID in our schools and our communities. And that's why it is so critically important that teachers and school staff have to be at the table for these decisions. We need a Secretary of Education who will work with teachers to help the states and districts develop reopening plans based on the best available public health information, instead of spending her time sending buckets of emergency taxpayer money to private schools. We need real leadership in the White House, starting with the president, to significantly reduce the spread of this virus. We need a Congress that will act fast to invest real money in stabilizing our state and local governments, our child care, and our K-12 schools, instead of blocking critical aid to schools and to states. Now, there are a lot of ways to accomplish these goals, but time is of the essence. We know we face an uphill battle here, but this is the fight that we have been called to, the fight to build an America that provides educators with the support and the respect that they need and deserve. An America that builds a better tomorrow for every child from birth, so that regardless of their zip code, their family income, their race, or their ability, they are safe and their opportunities look pretty much like everyone else's. An America that can only be possible with Joe and Jill Biden in the White House.
Unmute myself. Thank you, Senator. And that was also an amazing testament to our next speaker, who, many of us know from, the Obama years, but Dr. Jill Biden was a K-12 teacher and a community college professor. And during the entire time that her husband was the vice president, she kept her job as teaching students. And we are the largest higher ed union. We have a lot of community college professors, but they are a special breed in that there's a sense of the pathway that they help kids find and the ladder that they help kids climb from generation to generation. Dr. Biden lives this, breathes this. This is her soul. And you can see why, I was saying this earlier to Senator Warren and Dr. Biden, you can see why the joint platform, the unity platform that came out a couple of days ago was really so much the heart and soul of what we believe in. That's a large testament to the person who is at Joe Biden's side all the time, Dr. Jill Biden.
Thank you, Madam President. Randi, you are fierce and tireless. And for more than a decade now, you have been the face of this dynamic and powerful group of educators. And you fight for us every day. And of course, Joe and I are incredibly proud of the leaders and organizations who have chosen to stand by us. But as an educator myself, having the AFT on our side means so much to me personally. So thank you for your leadership and for your support. And thank you, Senator Warren, for joining us today. Elizabeth, as a fellow educator, an advocate, and as a senator, you have been an inspiration to so many people across our country for many, many years. You have fought for students and middle-class families, and the values that our nation aspires to live up to. And with every selfie, every pinky promise, you reminded young women across this nation that yes, they too belong in the White House, because running for president is what girls do.
Yes.
But you didn't do it alone. Bruce and Bailey were always by your side. And being the spouse of a candidate can be a surreal experience that not a lot of people relate to. So I enjoyed getting to know Bruce as well. You know, thank you for all that you've done for this nation and for your support in this race.
Thank you.
And hello, everyone at AFT. And it's so wonderful to be with the AFT membership, many of whom have been on our front lines during this pandemic, and so many passionate educators. I know a lot of you have been working hard to get the HEROES Act passed in the Senate, and I want to thank you for that. So before we jump into our conversation, I want to tell you a quick story. A few years ago, I went to Puerto Rico to see a school in a poor community of Punta Santiago. 6 months after Hurricane Maria ravaged the island, the effects of the storm were still ever present. The schoolyard remained piled with debris. Most of the buses were destroyed, as well, of course, as the parents' vehicles. So students as young as 5 years old had to walk miles and miles to school. Now, this was an American school, and the students there missed so much time in the classroom that they lost the entire academic year. And yet, amid the devastation, I saw hope growing like dandelions through concrete. The children laughed as they practiced their grammar lessons. And with saintly patience, the teachers would refocus the kids' attention. And on top of the dark, shoulder-high water lines that stained the walls, the teachers had pasted cheery, colorful paper flowers. In the face of devastation, I saw the strength of the human spirit, the determination to create something beautiful for our children, because that's what educators do. Make something out of nothing, inspire, instill confidence. We've seen it again and again during this crisis. Many of you learned to teach online nearly overnight. With creativity, you figured out how to reach children who don't have the internet or devices at home. You've been sounding boards, counselors, social workers, and so much more. And many of you have done it while trying to guide your own children through remote learning. If there's one thing that we've seen over these last few months, it's that schools are not just places where our children learn. They are the safe havens where students find counsel, purpose, and friendship. And they give parents the ability to focus on their careers and support families, knowing that their children are safe. And yet, it's also shown us the deep inequities in our system. Less access to technology and the internet, food insecurity, and the anxiety that comes from poverty. Safety, opportunity, and education can't be dependent on your race, family income, or zip code. And that's why we have to get reopening our schools right. A generation of students, families, and educators are counting on us to prevent the spread of this virus and empower them to grow and invest in our future. Our future. Joe understands that. And that's why schools are a key part of his vision of how we should reopen our economy safely. He knows that schools are going to need funds to keep them, to keep staff and students safe with protective gear. They're going to need help making sure classrooms can socially distance. And they're going to need to make sure that the students have access to broadband and other technology if we continue to rely on remote learning. They're going to need more mental health support to deal with the trauma of this pandemic. And I can't stress that enough. But Joe also understands that the best policies don't come from politics. Sorry, Elizabeth. They come from listening to educators like all of you. And you know better than anyone what your students need. And you need to be leading our efforts, not being told to, what you should do by politicians who have never stepped foot in a public school classroom. When Joe is president, he will make sure that you have the funding, guidance, and support that you need. He'll lift up your voice and make sure your right to organize is protected. And Randy, you know this better than anyone. He'll appoint a Secretary of Education who has actually taught public school and cares as much about our kids as you do. And most of all, he'll listen to educators. He'll have to, because he'll be sharing the White House with one. So that's why I'm here today, to listen, to learn, to take your stories back to Joe and to our campaign, and to thank you again for joining us, and thank you for your work. We are so proud to have the AFT on our side. And now I'm going to turn it back to Randy.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Senator Warren. And yes, look, I grew up in a family where I still called my parents' friends Mr. and Mrs. So sorry, Dr. B and Senator Warren, we love you, and and everyone who's watching, after you heard them, you can understand the deep conviction to the work that we do and our members do every single day to make a difference in the lives of children and students and young adults, and to really want to make sure that this moment is one where we can actually leap to hope and aspiration and overcome fear and anxiety. But we know we need leadership, and that's why we are really so excited about the Vice President. And I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. He was the person I went to all the time in the Obama administration, and he listened to us. He didn't always agree, but he really listened in the kind of respectful way and tried to make things right. And that's who we have, not just in Joe Biden, but in Dr. B and in Senator Warren. They try to make things right, to make government work for people. And, I just want to have each of our panelists speak for a few minutes and then open it up to other questions. We've asked our panelists not to take on the waterfront. And some of you saw that I was even reading some of my notes, because I can go on and on and on if I don't. But I want to make sure that we hit several of the real issues that are being raised and that our members care about in terms of safe reopening. What about reasonable accommodation? What about our kids' needs? What about money and the HEROES Act? So each of our speakers are going to just take one piece of this instead of all of it. And so Jerry Jordan, who is the president of AFT Local 3, we always compete between Chicago, which is Local 1, New York City, which I was the president of, and Michael Mulgrew is now Local 2, and Jerry Jordan, the president of Local 3 in Philadelphia. And he serves as the vice chair of AFT's Human and Civil Rights Committee, and he taught English to speakers of other languages prior to becoming an officer of the PFT. And Philly is a place where there's lots and lots of ventilation problems, and yet the local has really tried to figure out how to get those problems solved and how to reopen schools safely. And with that, I just want to, Jerry's going to talk about at-risk students and the need and their needs and what we need to do. Jerry.
Thank you very much, Randy, and Senator Warren and Dr. Biden. I thank you all for your unwavering leadership. Now more than ever, your efforts will be essential as we work to heal our nation in so many ways and address head-on what Randy describes as a triple crisis: the coronavirus pandemic, the economic recession, and systemic racism. For decades, the criminal underfunding of our schools has had a catastrophic effect on the lives of millions of our students across the nation. Here in Philadelphia, where the vast majority of our students are Black and brown, and over 80% live in poverty, this triple crisis has had profound ramifications. The most marginalized among us are the ones who have suffered the most during this crisis. And every single decision about reopening school buildings must address this profound inequity. And now, amidst rising cases of COVID across the nation, the current occupant of the White House has once again shown his absolute disregard for science and, quite frankly, for humanity. I was disgusted when I read that Trump referred to the CDC's guidelines as very tough and expensive, and prompting the current vice president to shortly thereafter indicate that the CDC would be revising their guidelines. Here in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers has been working tirelessly to advocate for the needs of the children we serve and the educators who serve them. We have conducted 3 surveys among our membership since the closure of school buildings, and we clearly know the significant concerns that our members have about COVID-19, remote learning, and reopening of schools. Let me be very clear. My membership wants to be in schools teaching face-to-face. Their efforts during this crisis in partnership with students and parents has been nothing short of heroic. And they have been the first to note that fundamentally, remote learning does not work for the majority of the children. Our teachers are miracle workers, but I ask you, how do you teach reading remotely to first graders or second graders or third graders? It's hard, but our teachers rose to the challenge. And even more challenging for students with special needs, English language learners, homeless students, and we have many students who depend on our schools for the main meals that they get during the day. Consider the thousands of students in Philadelphia with special needs. Senator Warren, as a former special education teacher, you know firsthand the remarkable promise and vulnerability of our youngsters with special needs. Their needs can be complex. Some students are medically fragile. Some need hand-over-hand learning. Others may need speech or occupational therapy. And some may need a one-to-one support staff member to accommodate their needs. This just doesn't happen from a computer screen. Mm-hmm. As we design reopening plans, special attention must be paid to ensuring that we are doing all we can to meet the needs of our students who suffered so profoundly during school closures. But planning for reopening must be based on a fundamental truth. Lives are at stake. Mm-hmm. stating that CDC guidelines are too expensive is an abject failure of leadership. If we as a society are not pulling out all of the stops to ensure that reopening is done safely, then we will only further the profound inequities already heightened by the COVID crisis. Mm-hmm. And our membership maintains a well-placed skepticism that our schools, so often shortchanged, will be given appropriate resources so desperately needed to reopen safely. We know that much of this comes down to funding, and we know that funding comes down to priorities. Mm-hmm. So as we move forward, all of us must collectively act with urgency and with an unwavering and unapologetic commitment to the young people and educators we are fortunate enough to serve every day. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. And what if Dr. B and Senator Warren don't mind, I'm going to have Melissa and then Philippe and Fed talk so you get a sense of what we're seeing across the country. And then, we'll have some time for give and take, and then hopefully some time for the questions that are coming in. We have I am told, over 70,000 people who are watching us right now. And more and more. This is on everyone's mind. And Melissa, Melissa Cropper, as you all know, works with Governor DeWine, who's a Republican governor in Ohio. And he went to the teachers very early on to say, what's going on? What do you need? Things like that. And Melissa was one of the first people to write me a several-page document saying, these are all the issues that we see and what we need. And she's going to focus on safety, what teachers and students need, reasonable accommodations, and the health tools, which she has really been thinking about for several months. Melissa, by the way, is not just the president of the Ohio Federation of Teachers, she also serves as secretary treasurer of the Ohio AFL-CIO. Melissa.
Thank you, Randy. It really is an honor to be on a call with three strong, powerful women leaders who have all been an inspiration to me. So I welcome this opportunity. As you indicated, we have been working for months on how to safely reopen our schools, as has AFT and other state feds across the whole nation. In the absence of guidance from a federal, or even quite honestly, slow guidance coming from a state level, we knew it was going to take a lot of planning, a lot of preparation, a lot of resources, and we simply could not sit around and wait for someone else to tell us what to do. So we have been working on safe reopening plans, and we've relied heavily upon the reopening plan that AFT put together, the checklist that AFT put out, which was phenomenal, that I shared with our governor on what safety would look like in schools. But quite honestly, the past few days have terrified our members. To hear Trump get up and say he wants to weaken the CDC guidelines, and that threaten to withhold money from schools if they do remote learning. I have had numerous calls come in the past few days of teachers who quite honestly are scared to death that they're going to be forced to go back and work in unsafe conditions, which of course we are not going to allow to happen. And though, Jerry referred to our teachers and paraprofessionals and support staff as miracle workers, I agree with him. They are miracle workers when it comes to how to take care of children. But one thing we can't do is bring someone back to life if they die as a result of working in unsafe conditions. Mm-hmm. And when I get calls from teachers who say, I live with someone who has an compromised immune system, including my own sister in Texas, where Governor Abbott has said, you're going to go back to school. And she's got a husband who has diabetes and lung disease. She's terrified of bringing sickness back. A member from my own local in Georgetown who has diagnosed respiratory problems, scared to death to go back into a classroom. We have to make sure that our classrooms are as safe as possible. And quite honestly, before this pandemic hit, we know that our schools had trouble getting soap and water in the schools. I mean, I had teachers in Cleveland telling me they don't even have soap in every one of their schools. We need so much more than soap now. We need the proper PPE. We need hand sanitizer. We need masks. There is so much that we need in order for our schools to be safe. And while I wholeheartedly agree that our teachers and support staff and paraprofessionals want to be back in school, we can't do it by risking people's lives to make it happen. So we have to really make sure that these safety measures are in place and that we're following these support guidelines. And we have to be angry if that doesn't happen and fight to make it happen. That is our responsibility to do that. So safety has to be the top concern. And in the absence of any of 100% safety measures, we have to make sure that our educators and support staff, paraprofessionals who are high risk have alternatives. They shouldn't have to choose between doing their jobs that they very much want to do and taking care of their health. Mm-hmm. We have to provide alternatives for how can they do their jobs while working remotely. Can they remotely teach into a classroom while someone else is covering the classroom and keeping the classroom safe? Can they do remote learning for the students who choose not to come to the school? Can they require masks to be worn in their classrooms when maybe they're not required in the whole school building? We've got to be looking for these alternatives for our members because they want to be doing the work. And I know, again, AFT has been really wonderful about looking at all these alternatives, looking at how our members are impacted by ADA and getting that, making sure that if they need to apply for disability, they can apply for a disability. But again, safety and alternatives and support for people and making these happen. And then we also need to make sure, and I believe Senator Warren, you referred to this before, that our teachers and paraprofessionals and support staff have a voice in what reopening looks like at a local level. So often, what we've seen happen in Ohio, we worked hard on a plan with the governor and with the Ohio Department of Education. That plan originally had a lot of mandates in it. Those mandates got watered down to one mandate, which is that staff has to act. Everything else goes to a local decision. I keep telling people local decision making does not mean that a superintendent or a school board make all the decisions. It means that educators and everyone else in the school system are involved in what a safe reopening looks like and how we educate students. So again, we have to be there at the table helping to make these decisions. We also need to have money for professional development to deal with not only what remote learning might look like if we're forced into a remote learning situation, but also how to deal with all the trauma that our students are bringing back to the classroom due to the COVID-19 pandemic and also due to all the racial injustice that has been happening over the past few months. All these things obviously require resources, and I'll let Philippe talk more about that, but we can't say enough times that we need the HEROES Act to pass. We need that money for our schools. We simply cannot safely reopen our schools and educate our students to the degree that we need to educate them without more resources. And the HEROES Act would go a long ways towards making that happen. So thank you very much for joining us and for listening. It gives us a lot of hope to know that we have Senator Warren on our side, that we have Dr. Biden and Vice President Biden, and hopefully President Biden in a few months to help us through this situation.
Myself. Thank you, Melissa. And there's one thing I want to reiterate that Melissa said, which is in the last 48 hours, we have gotten so many phone calls, and I know Fed has as well, of people who now are really wondering whether they can come back. They're taking care of their elderly parent. Many of us are in the sandwich generation. They're taking care of their kids. This virus is silent. And even if you're asymptomatic, you don't know if you're carrying it. And so that's part of the reason that I am now fearing that we're going to have a huge brain drain. At the very moment that our kids need the experience that teachers bring, that we're going to have a lot of people basically saying, I'm retiring, I'm leaving, I'm taking a leave, I need a reasonable accommodation because of the distrust they now have in what Donald Trump and Betsy DeVos will do. You've seen a huge sea change in the last 2 days in terms of fear because of what they have done. Now, that doesn't make it just has made our job harder, not easier, but we still need that funding. And so for that, I would like Philippe, who is the Secretary Treasurer, as I said before, the New York State United Teachers, Philippe Abraham, and he is the first higher education member to serve as a NYSET officer, and he's a former teacher of Spanish and French in middle school, high school, and college.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Randy. I must begin by saying I'm humbled to be part of this panel. Senator Warren, pleasure meeting you. Dr. Biden, pleasure having a fellow teacher on the panel. I want to begin my remarks by going a little back to 2008 and highlighting the fact that there was great damage done by the Great Recession of 2008, and that its lingering effects on funding for education were seeing being felt when COVID-19 happened. In fact, funding for our public services was inadequate pre-pandemic. Education funding was no exception. We know that 41 states were spending less on a per student basis than they did prior to the Great Recession. For K-12, the data shows 20 states spending less than they did per student pre-Great Recession. The pre-COVID state of affairs was inequitable, which has been mentioned by, and this is what happens when you're on panel with fellow teachers. Everybody covers all the points, so I'm going to repeat some of what was said before, but it bears repeating, that the state of affairs was inequitable to begin with, and the current situation exacerbates those inequities. When schools were closed, 15% of US households and 35% of low-income households with school-age children did not have high-speed internet connection at home. 15% and 35%. So it affects urban areas as well as rural areas. So those who can least afford not to have instruction, even remotely, were the ones not able to have it because of the lack of connectivity. And that also goes to the actual items needed, such as a tablet. If you can afford one, you're missing out on the instruction as well. So it's not only the connectivity, but it's also the instruments that are needed. We know that to maintain our standing as a world leader, America needs a well-educated population. This crisis demands that we take bold action and invest in the recovery and the future of America. The CARES Act was a good beginning, but we can't stop there. We need the Federal HEROES Act to be passed by the Senate. We need to be passed because it will help stabilize state and local governments, which have been negatively impacted by the pandemic. Governors from all 50 states have issued emergency declarations and taken steps to reallocate their budgets. And these governors, Democrats and Republicans, want to prevent another round of layoffs. If they don't have the funding, they'll have to lay off folks, and they're trying to prevent that. For example, in my own state, our deficit right now is $14 billion that the governor is facing. New York State. These cuts have real effect on families, which are already suffering from the crisis. And for example, we are seeing faculty furloughs in New Jersey, program cuts at the University of Alaska in Massachusetts, layoff at CUNY, the University of New York, and there are more cuts from K-12 as well. All told, this has had a devastating impact on education, especially for people of color, as Jerry mentioned earlier. As I mentioned before, the pandemic has laid bare what was occurring before and was precarious. So now we have it full blast. For example, we also have new needs, and Melissa hit on those and all the list of things that folks said for reopening we need, which they, according to the president, that's so expensive. But I want to ask a question about that. How much is a life worth? What is the cost of a life for our members to be returning to work and exposed, and the students and their families, without the proper PPE, the conditions, the 6 feet, the restructuring of the whole operation? How much is that worth? And folks have, this is real, this is not a hoax. Folks are dying from this disease. So there is a cost, and the AFT has factored that cost. We have about $1.2 million per school for the safe reopening. The HEROES Act would go a long way in assisting with that cost and making sure that schools are reopening safely and that our members, the children, their families, the staff, everyone is safe. And I have more data on numbers and what it will cost, but I will stop there because I was also warned that we're running short on time, so I will stop there.
Thank you. This is what's so amazing by being able to do chats in this kind of way. Thank you, Philippe. And I want to bring in Fed Ingram because like all of this is happening in Florida. And the nonsense as the Florida cases surge, because that governor disregarded every health tool and consideration, then they're now rushing to try to reopen schools 5 days a week with keeping kids in there as a sardine can, and wondering why we are fighting to actually try to create the safe conditions for kids and educators. And Fed is dealing with all of that. So Fed Ingram.
Hi, good afternoon to everybody. And thank you all for having me. To our American hero, Elizabeth Warren, thank you very much. To our future First Lady, thank you. And to our American and international leader, Randi Weingarten, I appreciate you all. Florida is the epicenter of this pandemic. We are in the vortex of this virus. 8,948 new cases today. 120 new deaths today. People died today from the coronavirus in Florida. 4,009 total deaths. An 11-year-old child died today in Broward County from the coronavirus. And yet we have a governor that has tied himself to the President of the United States to say, hell or high water, full steam ahead. We're gonna open up schools no matter what. On Monday, we get a gross tweet from our president that says we will open schools in the fall with no backdrop, with no comprehension, with no strategy behind that. And then on Monday in Florida, we get an executive order from our Commissioner of Education who says, again, we're just step on the gas and let's open our schools no matter what, and you will provide brick and mortar as an option no matter what. And so in a state where we are surrounded by water on three sides, you can't go to some beaches because they're closed. You can't go to gyms because they're closed. You can't go to some restaurants because they're closed or at 25%. We're okay with putting hundreds and sometimes thousands of kids in a confined area that we don't know what's going to be the outcome. And we won't sit down together collaboratively to work out a plan. We do not want to be the petri dish for this nation. And we're asking for some help. We have no trust, we have no respect for the leadership that is tied to our federal government because it is tied to Betsy DeVos. And we have not had any leadership from our Secretary of Education in over 3 years. 2.8 million children attend our public schools in the state of Florida. Over 200,000 school employees are committed to us getting this right. This is a life or death situation. And we're simply asking for the things that the public healthcare administrators say. We need social distancing. We need hand washing stations. We need smaller class sizes. And we know this is going to cost more money and not less money. We have historically underfunded our schools in the state of Florida, grossly underfunded our schools in the state of Florida. We're 46th in the nation in teacher pay. We're 43rd in per pupil spending. It's embarrassing. And so we need money. And let me just give you an anecdote. If we're going to get kids to their schools from home on buses, this is going to cost money. Because if we have to go from 2 to a seat to 1 to a seat, then either you're going to have to hire more bus drivers, you're going to have new bus routes, or you're going to have a fleet of buses that are going to do that because these buses may be at 25% capacity. And so we want to be in school. Let me just say that I'm a high school band director. I want more than anything for our kids to be back with their coaches, with their counselors, with their first and second grade teachers who are almost giddy and ready to get back to school. But we must do this safely and we must do this carefully. And so we need you. We need you, Senator Warren, to help with this HEROES Act. We need you, First Lady, Second Lady Jill Biden, soon to be First Lady, to keep pushing Joe, because we need to get this right. We hang in the balance. Our educational support professionals are a part of this village. Our secretaries, our security monitors, our cafeteria workers, our bus drivers, our paraprofessionals. They need us. They already make less than a living wage. And so I will tell you that it is all hitting at one time here in Florida. And I'll leave you with this. This is the home of Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, one of the greatest educators that this nation has ever known. We are trampling over her legacy right now because she would want us to enter our school safely, give us some options, and do this slowly. Thank you, Randy, for your time and your opportunity.
And thank you, all of you. And, you know, you can hear, and I just want to open it up to the Senator and Dr. Biden, because you just can, you know, we could talk for hours about this. You can hear not only the passion, but our frustration with not having anyone in Washington in the current administration to work with, despite the fact that we've been on this since February. So let me just open it up because we've talked a lot at Dr. Biden, at the Senator. So let me open it up to you two.
Would you like to start, Dr. Biden, or you want me to?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So let me just, I know that we're tight on time, so let me just make a couple of points. The first one is thank you. I can't tell you how important it is just to hear your voices and to hear the passion and to hear the commitment. But it also reminds me why I'm so committed to seeing Joe Biden become the next president of the United States. I listened to every one of these problems about our most vulnerable kids, about the need for resources, about the urgency of this moment, about the importance of safety. And how I think about this is we had a system that was not working before, a system that was under-resourced, a system where children, because of the zip code they were born into, because their families didn't have resources, that those children's educational opportunities were more crimped. A system in which structural racism is a part of what these children have to deal with every day. And so when I hear what Joe Biden wants to do, yeah, it's about getting our schools open safely now, but it's bigger than that. It's more systemic than that. It's having an education system that really works for every one of our educators and that works for every one of our kids. And here's what he wants to do. First, put in more resources. He is committed on this. More money into our school system, more money for our kids who need it, more money for our educators, more money to get the job done. You know, I hear the point. We have miracle workers, but they got to have resources to work with. The second is to make sure there's somebody in charge of this, that the money gets spent the right way. When Joe Biden says he's not only getting rid of Betsy DeVos, hallelujah, he also says he's going to put someone who has taught in public school as Secretary of Education. That gives me the confidence that it won't just be more money that then flows out the door to someone else. It will be money that goes into our public schools, money that goes into strengthening our public schools. But the third part I hear from Joe Biden is the commitment. The commitment. Listen to what Randi said. She said year after year after year, when he was vice president and she needed help, she went to see Joe Biden because he listened, because he got it. And look who Joe Biden has got at his side. Dr. Jill Biden, someone who has committed her own life to education from beginning all the way through. Someone who is there and has been there for our kids. Someone who has been there in a public school system to see where it works and to see where it needs more help so it can work better. That's the kind of commitment that means that if we get the money, we get the right person at the Department of Education, that we will have two partners in the White House who will make sure that our children get the kind of opportunities that they deserve. I know I'm on this call with the educators who truly believe, the people who have put their whole lives in. I want to see two people in the White House who are committed to making that happen. And that's why I am all in for Joe Biden, and we've all got to turn out come November 2020.
Thank you, Senator.
You said it so beautifully. And, you know, as an educator, I'm heartbroken. I'm heartbroken for all of the educators and the support staff and our students. You know, it's just, it's all about leadership. It's all about leadership. And Elizabeth gave you all the, you know, parts of Joe's plan, but I have to tell you, I just wish we could vote today, because Joe has a strategy for getting our schools back. And that includes that, you know, first and foremost, listening to the CDC and the doctors and the scientists to tell us when it is safe to go back. And then when we go back, all of us, when we go back, that we are safe and that we have what we need, you know, all the health, the PPE that we need. And it's got to come from the top. And that's why we have got to change the leadership in this country. And I just can't say it more strongly, just like Elizabeth did and Randy, just like you did. So we got to get out there and vote. We've got to make sure that AFT gets out there and gets everyone on board, their families, their friends, everyone has got to vote. So this country goes in a new direction.
Look, you know, I mean, I want to just, first off, I want to say thank you to both of you. And I think part of why we're doing this today, and I hear there's even more people that are watching, is because, you know, educators don't feel listened to.
Yeah.
You know, they have the you know, the responsibilities of the world on their shoulders, and they're really strategic and they're really innovative, as both of you have been, and the leaders on the roundtable have been. But they're always doing more with less. And this is an unprecedented situation where there's so many things that are coming at us. It's going to be hard enough to try to figure out how to teach in this new normal, and how, you know, schools are not set up to do physical distance and for kids to be wearing masks. And we're going to have to create culture change, and, you know, Fed is going to have to be doing some ban thing to, you know, get people, you know, into a groove on this. But you know, it's also, and this gets us to Stacey Davis Gates's question from Local 2. You know, we talked about Local 3. I competed with Local 2, which is mine. Stacey Davis Gates is from Local 1 in Chicago. And what she asked, because what she's saying is that all of the issues of society are on the schoolhouse door. So she sees in Chicago a really underfunded social safety net. It's why, and thank you. And I know Dr. Biden wanted to be on the line in Chicago as well, but Senator Warren was with me on that line in Chicago, because unemployment for Black men there are 53%. They're on the precipice of mass evictions nationwide. It gives you a sense of why we need the election today, not in November, because all of this is happening because the impact of COVID on Black and Latino communities is exacerbating the already pre-existing issues of health disparities and lack of affordable housing and persistent unemployment and underemployment. And so part of what, you know, our colleagues, our sisters and brothers, and our trans cousins want in Chicago is they want that plan that the vice president said today in terms of the economics. They want the plans about reimagining society, because all of this is going to be on the schoolhouse door. And how do we have schools as that kind of center of community and center those services as well, which will be very, very, very needed. So her question is, how do we reimagine school communities so we can deal with these kind of issues that disproportionately affect Black and brown lives?
Well, you know, Randy, you know, this pandemic has shined such a bright, hot light on the racial inequities in our system that have to be addressed. And we see, you know, the challenges that so many families are facing. The lack of technology or broadband, like we've said, food insecurity, child abuse is on the rise. We have to build back better and reimagine our system so that it works for every community, urban communities, rural communities. So to do that, we need to reopen in a way that's, safe for the children, educators, and helps parents get back to work to support families. And that's why I wish that Joe were president right now, because I'm telling you, he would be partnering with educators, childcare providers, unions, communities, and families to ensure that schools and childcare facilities open safely and have the resources and the support they need. And as president, Joe is going to strengthen our schools to meet whatever challenges we all face. And like Elizabeth said, he's going to put more money into the schools, especially into Title I schools, which serve the highest number of low-income children. And he's going to expand the community model. And I'm sure, everybody's familiar with that, to meet all the needs of our families, from housing to health to food and after school care.
I think Stacy was really driving at that, because I think in Chicago, as well as so many other places, Melissa has been really pushing doing a community school model in Ohio, starting with the Youngstown and Lordstown area. And so I think that that's really important, and that I want our listeners in the Facebook and Zoom universe to really hear what Dr. Biden just said, and what I know both Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren had really pushed during the campaign. I'm going to ask, I know it's time to go, and I just want to raise one more of the questions, because these are two PSRPs, meaning two paraprofessionals, that came together, one from Macomb in Michigan and the other from Detroit in Michigan. And, because they oftentimes get forgotten, but our paraprofessionals are bus drivers who have transported students to and from school and field trips, and have played a critical role during COVID in terms of actually transporting grab and goes, and also transporting work back to teachers. You have the secretaries and the front line office workers who have been going into buildings now to make sure that they are fielding difficult questions and getting things done while we've been in high quarantine. And Michigan has been a place that has been really severely hit, and because of that governor and the work that she has done, as we all know, has really helped tackle the curve. But then there's the food service workers. We serve over 30 million breakfasts and lunches every day, and the food service workers have been going into schools every single day to do the grab and goes, not only for the kids we serve, but for their families. And then, of course, there are the custodians and the groundkeepers and the maintenance workers. And their question is, this is from Jeff Whittle and Donna Jackson: how do we make sure all of these critical staff, how do we make sure they're not invisible? How do we make sure they're recognized? How do we make sure that not only is their work, which has been so essential right now, recognized, but how do we protect them and protect their pathway to a better life?
I think that is a terrific question. I just want to say, I think this is a matter of respect and a matter of drawing on the expertise of the people who are on the front lines and know what's going on. That's why it's so important that teachers and paraprofessionals, that our school bus drivers and our cafeteria workers have a voice and a say in all of the reopening decisions. They need to be at the table every step of the way. School districts and states that are trying to figure out about school openings have to consider the health and safety of the entire school community. And they have to focus especially on teacher and paraprofessional safety. Adults who work in schools have to feel safe, and they have to be safe when they come there. We now know that many teachers and coaches and cafeteria staff and Janitorial staff and other workers are at high risk for COVID-19. And the administration's, the Trump administration's total failure to mount an adequate public health response to the pandemic means that infections are going up. They're soaring in many communities around the country, and particularly in communities of color. And that increases the hurdles for communities that are trying to work and to reopen their schools. So for me, the respect means everybody gets at the table who's going to be directly affected. And they're there because they have expertise to bring and help show us the most effective, safest ways to be able to reopen our schools.
Well, I'd just like to make 2 points. One is it's about money, that to make sure that the local governments and the state governments get the funding that they need to pay the educators and the support professionals, and we make sure that we get, the minimum wage is $15. And I want to assure you, everyone on this call, that the paraprofessionals and the support professionals and the educators, everyone will have a seat at the table when Joe Biden is president.
So, I know we have gone past our time by a few minutes. So I want to just see if the senator and Dr. Biden have any closing thoughts. I want to just say to both of you, look, we wish you were there right now. We just, because you can see, there was 1 or 2 more questions about just the frustration boiling over. People, we're facing 3 crises. Our kids are hurting, parents are hurting, and our educators are just trying to figure out how to deal with all of that and how to deal with their own lives as well. And they really want to teach, and they really want to do their jobs, and they really know how important they are, but they so need a partner in the White House, and they so need a Senate that is going to actually work with us, where we don't have to do millions of dollars of ads to beg for the money that we need because a pandemic reduced the funding in states. And all of these safety precautions and the mental health needs and the food insecurity and the instructional needs are going to cost 20% more, not 20% less. So speaking to both of you is such a breath of fresh air when we're talking about equity and safety and access and all of this. And so we wish you were there now, Dr. Biden. We wish Joe Biden was president now. But we know we got to vote, and we know it's not going to happen by magic, and we have to do everything we can. But I just can't thank you enough for listening to us and all of the not just the frustrations, but the challenges, but the hope and the understanding you heard from Fed and Melissa and Philippe and Jerry, and the questions that people have had. I just can't thank you enough.
Randi, thank you, and thank you to the AFT. Thank you to all your members who are here on this Zoom. And I just want to reassure everybody that if and hopefully when we're elected, you, the educators, the unions, the students, the parents will have a partner, 2 partners in the White House. Thank you.
I just want to reiterate what Dr. Biden is saying, because it is going to be extraordinary to have 2 partners in the White House, to have such a remarkable man to be president, but such a remarkable woman who is an educator through and through, and who will be there every day to make sure that every one of these promises is kept, because she has made her life's commitment to our kids. I think that Dr. Jill Biden is one of the very best reasons to vote for Joe Biden. Many good ones, but that's a particularly good one. The only other thing I want to say, Randi, is when you say people feel frustrated, people feel worried, people are worried about what's going to happen next, I say, I get it. But the next time you feel frustrated, do something about it.
Yeah.
The next time you feel angry, do something about it. The next time you feel worried, do something about it. And the thing you can do is you can sit down and think, okay, we are aiming toward November 3rd. How do we make sure that Joe Biden is going to be elected and we're going to get Democrats up and down the ballot? So think about your friends who might not be registered to vote. Call them, talk to them, email them, text them, make sure that do one thing every day. And when you get used to doing one thing every day, do two things every day and then do three. But remember, don't just sit there and be frustrated. Don't waste your energy spinning around. Make your energy, put it to work to make real change. Because come November 3rd, it's all going to be on the line. It's going to all be on the line for our kids. That's why we're in this fight. And you can make that difference. So let's make it happen.
So thank you. I want to just thank everybody who's been on the Zoom and the thousands of people who are watching. Thank you for the people who are watching. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for the work that you've been doing. Thank you for being those essential heroes that have helped us through this huge pandemic. To Senator Warren, I mean, look, you know how we feel about you. But it's just the work that you've done to create and make education important in the Senate for the last many years on the K-12 as well as higher ed level has really created narrative change. And that's really important regardless. And to Dr. Biden, I wish you were in the White House now. And as you know, between you and Joe Biden, you two meet the moment that we are in right now that America needs. Because it's no longer a fight just for the soul of the country. It is a fight to reimagine America's better angels. And you show that every single day.
Thank you.
To Philippe, to Melissa, to Fed, to Jerry, thank you for bringing your hearts, your souls, your passion, your eloquence to this roundtable. And I want to say to everybody who's on the Zoom still, please, you hear that passion. You hear the attention and the commitment to our kids, our educators, our public schools. We need to be able to do more than be frustrated about it. As Senator Warren says, we have to go out and act. And act means getting Joe Biden elected as president and others up and down the ticket who will actually fight for children, who care, who show up, who fight, and now all of us who vote. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.